Hey guys, Brendan, by the way, that audio guy. Today we're going to talk about a limiter and why that's important to understand how it works. So a limiter is basically a compressor with an insane ratio. Okay, so if you remember the compressor video, then we know that the ratio is the ratio at which the compressor compresses. So if it's 2-to-1, it compresses at a 2-to-1 ratio. So a limiter is basically like an insane compressor. Now, why is that important for you to understand? Let's take a look at these two wave tracks. Okay, I don't want you to look at the loudness. So this is the loudness, right? How high up it is. I want you to look at the character. All right, so the character of this song is pretty steady. I mean, there's like a bump here in energy, but then it just barely climbs and then drops off, right? Whereas this one starts at about the same loudness, if not quieter than this guy, and then gets louder, 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 and then super loud. Now, why is this important for you to understand? In music, there is a thing called dynamics, and you want a dynamic range to have a more impactful, punchy song. However, in film, especially in a dialogue interview type track where it's more background music, that can be to your disadvantage. Now, it's nothing against the song or the composer. It's that they chose to do it more dynamic. Now, you as the filmmaker, and if you're hiring someone to do sound, they should hopefully know how to do this. But you need to understand the difference between these two things. So when you mix your dialogue to sound good, say right here, and then all of a sudden by here, it's like, oh, I can't hear my dialogue anymore. It's because the song is increasing in volume as it goes along because it's a lot more dynamic. So how do you make a song less dynamic? You use a limiter. We know that compressor glues things together. If you remember from the compression video, you take your lowest point and your highest point and you kind of bring those together. So a limiter, exact same thing. It's taking your high point and your low point and bringing them together. So you're essentially trying to get this volume closer to this volume, okay? And this volume closer to this volume. So more squashed, like this guy. So that is a more squashed example of a song than this one. So where is the limiter? How do you use it? So we're going to go to compression, amplitude and compression, and we're going to just click on this guy, dynamics. Okay, so this is a compressor. I used a different compressor in the compression video, but it doesn't matter. In this one, here's what we're going to try. We're going to do limiting. Okay, so this is going to set up so it's in limiter mode. All right, now threshold, it's the same thing as the other one, but basically this is telling itself like, hey, this is a limiter mode. We're going to have an insane, ratio, and the attack and the release is going to be calculated accordingly. Okay, so check this out. As we bring down the threshold, then this limit thing is going to turn red, saying that it's acting and it's limiting. So listen to the character of the song. Can you hear how it's like distorting and getting squashed? Let me turn it off. Now check out our wave right here. Check out our peaks. It's like locked at 21. Now it's going up there. And see how much it's moving around? Duh, duh, duh. And then when you limit it, it's like brick wall. That's what we call it in music. It's a brick wall limited. And especially once these drums come in. Okay, so hear how unpleasant that is? That's an extreme example. Now, basically, all you're doing, now imagine you're taking a pair of scissors, and this is your threshold, and you're saying, I'm going to put my threshold here. You are taking scissors and you're basically like chopping off that information. Like you saw here, it's just pressed up against that thing super hard. Now, use this as a tool to help you level out your dialogue in a background music type piece. Okay, so obviously we're not going to go that extreme. So here's one trick I like to do. I recommend going to the loudest portion of your song, so obviously like right around here, and do something that sounds decent. So we'll just bring this back up. Now, this limiter, you can hear it grabbing and stretching and pulling. Now, what we can try is maybe doing a different type of limiting. So like a soft clip limiting. Let's try that out and see what that guy sounds like. Okay, so it's still pretty distorted, but the trick here is how does it line up with your dialogue, and is your music way up front? Now, as a massive music person, I hate nothing more than to hearing music massively distorted and crushed. So use your best judgment as to what sounds good, but understand how a limiter works and what it can do to audio to get it more flatlined. So you don't always have to use a limiter. You can even just try a compressor, okay? Just know that there is, that option is there. So let's try and see what it sounds like with the compressor. So let's do about the same setting we had with the limiter. Let's do like -15 or something. Okay, and here's where you can mess with the attack and the release. And you can even limit it after the compressor to make sure that it doesn't go above. And that sounds a lot better than just the straight up limiter. So use the compression in coordination with the limiter, vice versa. Maybe sometimes the song just needs a limiter. It totally depends on the song, okay? Use your ears and make sure you're not hurting the musician's integrity by just destroying their song, okay? So this one, I'm showing an extreme example of something that's like grinding. Another thing you can do if you want is to EQ out some of the low end, because the low end takes up a lot of information. So what we could do here is, let's say and do this before your compressor. So before your compressor, just take this low shelf and try and pull it out. Let's hunt for a big, there we go. We don't need that in our interview. We don't need that in our dialogue. Okay, so check this out. So we've now successfully removed a ton of the low end. Listen to this. So here's on. Off. Okay, so low end takes up a ton of information, but when you're doing interview dialogue with a song like that, you don't need the low end. People aren't watching your video, to cry because there's a huge boomy bass and it brings tears to their eyes. No, like they're focusing on the dialogue. And again, some videos may play off of the music, so you don't want to pull out as much low end, but use your best judgment. So now that we've successfully removed a lot of the low end, we now have more room to make our song even flatter. So if we pull up the dynamics here, we can then compress the song a lot more because we have more room to compress without it squashing. See, so check this out. We're getting 5 dB of gain reduction. That means how much dB is being pulled down by the compressor. So listen to the difference. I'm going to toggle on and off the EQ so you can hear with it and without it. Hear how it all of a sudden gets really clogged, and you can tell when the compressor hits in, it's like... right? So by EQing, pulling out some of that low end stuff we don't necessarily need for our dialogue interview track, we can then successfully compress the track, limit the track, bring the whole thing together, make it more even, make it easier for us to mix in our dialogue. Okay? That's a lot to take in, but it's super helpful, and you're going to use this a lot more than you think you are. I actually did this trick a few weeks ago on a project. A guy sent me this song, actually, this exact song and this exact song. And this one worked really well because it was limited. And, there weren't many dynamics in the song. And then this one has a lot of dynamics, which is great for listening for the music. But for this certain case, I didn't need that. So I cut out the low end and I limited it, brought down the compression so it was a lot more even and nice. So go get a drink of water after that. That's a lot to take in. Use your best judgment. Use your ears. If it sounds gross, if you're hurting the song, you don't want some artist blowing your video out, distorting the whites. That looks horrible. So just like that, the artist doesn't want you to distort their song and make it sound disgusting. However, pulling out the low end EQ and then compressing a little bit doesn't change the character of the song hardly at all. Use your best judgment. See you on the next one, guys.